Hello, welcome. My name is Isaiah Boyce. I'm the president of Pride Alliance, and thank you for joining me for our 12th annual Coming Out for Equality event. It's great to see you here. I remember being here last year as a speaker myself, as just a member of Pride Alliance, and now I'm the president. So it's fun to be here again and speaking again, as well as leading this next event this year with my lovely fellow guest speakers. We have 3 of our faculty and staff speakers here, as well as 1 student speaker agreed to join us today. And afterwards, we'll have some refreshments and cookies for you to join, but right now we'll hear some great stories and some great speeches from my fellow Pride Alliance members, as well as people in the community. So we'll start with Helma. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out in the rainy/snowy weather. So my name is Helma. I am an out faculty member. I'm also a political scientist who studies LGBTQ and marriage equality movements. And this is my 10th Coming Out for Equality at Pitt-Bradford, so 10 out of 12, pretty good. My wife and I have a son who's 6 years old, and we just had a daughter last month who's now 6 weeks old today. Given our recent family expansion, I found myself reflecting on my journey as a parent, because I've obviously been focused on this infant who needs us 24 hours a day, and I've been thinking a lot about parenting. So that kind of affected the themes for today. And I also want to talk a lot about representation and visibility. So when I first came out to my parents, they struggled to accept that I was gay and that my life would not be, well, they had this idea that my life wouldn't be what they envisioned. And so one of the topics that came up immediately was that they had this perception that I wouldn't either be able to have children, or if I did, that I would somehow cause harm to them. And this was very hurtful to me because my siblings have a mom who's gay. They're all good people. They've made good contributions. They're all good parents. I became an aunt when I was 10 years old already. My nephew just had a baby, so that was an interesting experience because I held him in the hospital and now I've held his baby. I have 7 nephews and nieces that I already had doted on before, by the time I came out. So I love children, and it was very important to me to have children. I realize it isn't for everyone, but for me it was. So I explained to my parents that society had changed, that there are different options for parenting, and that children of gay people face a very different world than they did even 10 to 20 years ago. And this was already, quite some time ago that I was having this conversation with them in my early 20s, let's just say that. So about 20 years ago. So it's another 20 years fast forward now, from that conversation that I'm thinking about this. So this perception of that there was something damaging about me parenting was really painful at the time. It was part of our discussion about me coming out. And, for my family, I think the biggest concern that they had was that my child would be treated differently and discriminated against, and that there was a sense that having a non-heteronormative family structure and gender roles that were not like gender typical, that could be damaging to my child. That was sort of where they were coming from at the time. And I had like an almost 50-year gap with my dad, so, we had very different senses of those things at the time. So other than my siblings, I at that time didn't have a lot of representation or visibility of queer families. I did have my siblings, but that was it. And, at the time, there wasn't that much visibility even on television. That changed by the time I was in graduate school, not even, maybe college, graduate school, and then really after that. And so, that affected my sense of how easily this would be possible and what that would be like. And so I was fortunate, though, that shifted, and that for me changed my own ideas about it. And I started a job in my late 20s in the state of Connecticut, and there was a proliferation of queer people having families, and they were really generous, and they shared their experiences with me, their parenting journeys. I got to know their families, and it was really beautiful to see the kind of loving relationships these families had and how resilient their children were. And it really inspired me. And it led me to think about things and to think about how did I want to parent, and what kind of parent did I want to be, and what was it important to do for my children. And so the shift in representation, visibility, and contact had a big impact on me as a potential parent even. And so I learned how important it is also for children in rainbow families to see their own families be represented, to have pride in themselves and their families, and to be able to respond to questions about their families. From the beginning with our son, we've read lots of books about diverse kinds of families. And it was interesting to see, like, it meant so much to him when he got sent home with a book from his own class about a gay family. To have a TV show he likes and that family is like our family. Like he really appreciates that when that happens. Representation matters, not just for gay people, but also for rainbow families. And I knew that coming out would be relevant to him and that he would have to come out in many ways because he'd have to tell our family story. But I didn't realize it happened every single day and often multiple times a day. So it's very different than like me coming out, which is, selectively, and it depends on the situation. But like he's coming out all the time. But I also didn't realize how, in today's society that would be a different experience. It really, he has had a very positive experience. He's so proud of his mommy, his baby sister, and he's always said, oh, my mom at home is like this. My mommy here, she likes that, and the other kids, it's not really a big deal for them. So it's been very positive henceforth. Even in our rural region, there's a lot of queer families that are raising children. When we had our son, we didn't really know a lot of queer families in our region, but now we do. And we've even started the Cattaraugus County Pride Coalition to have events that are family friendly so that, kids can see families like themselves. So it's been a really positive, even change over the last 6 years. Even going to the hospital was a different experience this time. When our son was born, they had just legalized same-sex marriage federally in 2015, and he was born in 2016. And so at that time, it was still a little bit of like an unusual thing, like there was another like gay family in the childbearing class, but that was it. And they had occasionally had to do you have to do a declaration of parentage when you're not biologically related to your child to be on their birth certificate. So that was kind of an unusual thing at the time, but now it's more of a matter of course. What I did notice still is that my wife had to give permission for me to have skin-to-skin contact with our baby when she was having breathing difficulties because we hadn't done that yet. So it's interesting to see some of the things that still stay. But this time around, we had an out lesbian nurse who used to be really closeted, and we had this really fun experience with her, and I got to do like my drag reveal of our daughter's name. It was actually pretty fun, and she participated in that. And it was interesting because she used to be totally closeted at work, and she was telling us this story and sort of reveling in how things have changed, And so, it was very meaningful, I have to say, a very special time in the hospital, and I felt so welcomed, and it felt very just as a matter of course, which was very special. So my father died during the pandemic. He was 91, and we decided to honor our daughter. We gave her a middle name honoring him. And he had a hard life. He was in a concentration camp, and he survived a lot of difficulties. And he immigrated to a new country and started over and built a family he loved a lot. And so, it was really amazing. Before he died, though, he got to know our son and love him, and he got to see what great parents we are. And if you had asked him, he would have unequivocally stated that. And for me, it came kind of full circle, all the concerns he had. It really was special to me that he got to realize that our son is healthy, resilient, and loved, and is surrounded by a loving family, and he got to appreciate the beauty of what my spouse and our love has created, and that we nurture. Being a parent, I think, for me has been one of the hardest things in life, but also probably the most beautiful thing I've experienced. And I know that sounds maybe cliche, but there's something very special about, this little life that's come into the world, and you nurture it, and you provide it with love, and you try to support it in developing into its potential of what it can be and how it can contribute to the world. And I have a love with my wife that it's special how that has sort of affected how our children have been developing, and we're biologically each related to one of our children, and it's kind of an interesting thing because they have the same donor, and love isn't about biology, but there's something very special in the connection you have regardless of biology, and that's something beautiful to discover too. So anyway, I found myself reflecting on my experience as a queer parent because I'm in the midst of it right now, but representation matters. Even like for my mom, she lives in an assisted living here, and I think like since coming here, she's got to meet other queer families who have children in our area, and like I think she's realized that our son is going to have a good experience because she's seen their families have good experiences. And so even like representation even matters to our extended family because it helps them to like realize that things are changing and that some of their concerns that they can be assuaged a little bit, I think. So that's where I'm coming from today. Coming out day is a day that's very important for all of us, coming out about who we are, but it's also important to our extended families in different ways. And I think representation and visibility are so important. And that's why I, try to share my story as well. Okay, thank you. Levi.
Hello, my name is Levi, and I use he, they pronouns, and I am a freshman in college. I am obviously here to talk about coming out, but before I start talking about my coming out, I wanted to talk about how coming out, especially even in 2022, can be a complicated process. Some people deal with parents that are supportive, while others are completely disowned by their families. And as important as it is to celebrate people who can be out, we also need to think about the people in the world who are unable to. Now on to me. I don't consider my story special, really in any way. I actually found it kind of funny as I was writing this last night and reflecting on kind of how I was in high school and how I am now. So back when I first came out, I identified as a cis bisexual woman, and now I identify as a transmasculine bisexual. I pulled, as some people in the community would say, an Uno reverse card on my gender. But it took me a very, very long time to come to terms with it. Believe it or not, I had to get into an argument with my high school guidance counselor about how I can indeed use he, him pronouns and they, them pronouns at the exact same time. I've also gained support from old friends and new. Coming out can be a difficult process, but nothing is as difficult as hiding your true self. As the great woman Taylor Swift once said, shade never made anybody less gay. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Janelle Johnson, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a librarian here on campus, and my path to allyship is full of memorable moments. Moments that have challenged me to unlearn and relearn. Moments where I have been entrusted by many with their stories and invited into their lives. And moments of speaking up and calling out, as well as also calling in. But speaking of my journey is from a place of privilege that has allowed me to love and express my identity without fear is not what I want to focus on today. First, I really want to be mindful for one moment and stop to recognize this beautiful occasion. As we're here together to celebrate and honor the LGBTQ community. If anything, I hope this day inspires you. I hope you want to learn more about how to call someone in or speak up against hate, bigotry, ignorance, and discrimination. To be aware and look around and ask, who's not sitting here? Who's not represented? And who should be here with us? Whose voices should be heard? And then also be curious. How can we help create the safe space and welcoming spaces that all LGBTQ plus people and community, their folks, all those who need that and deserve it. Often we doubt the power that one holds, that one person holds. For example, one study found that for LGBTQ youth, having one supportive person in their lives decreases suicide risk by up to 40%. One supportive person. Love is life-saving. To learn to be an ally, you don't have to invent the process. And because I'm a librarian, how could I not include quality resources in my speech today? So there are countless quality resources created by and for the LGBTQ community and also its allies. From the Trevor Project, the Human Rights Campaign, Campus Pride, Learning for Justice, that's just to name a few. On this campus, we also have many resources. We have many allies. We have those who are part of the Rainbow family. We have those community members. And I'm just one of those. And I'm very honored to speak here today, but I'm just one of those. And I'm one of those people here that want to help others learn and better understand how to apply diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility practices. Suppose you don't know where to start. Perhaps you're wondering about your identity, your sexual orientation, or maybe you just want to learn more about the LGBTQ community, their experiences, maybe they become an ally. You're not alone. Sometimes it's impossible to understand how many resources are available to help you build a space that values diversity, values respect, vulnerability, inclusion, and equity. And it's absolutely okay if you are unsure of where to start or what more could I do? Because we can all grow in our understanding and we can all continue to learn how to apply strategies within our communities. One final note. With all that's been going on, from book bannings to laws passed to exclude gender-affirming services in healthcare, to outright discrimination and hate acts against those in the Rainbow community, there's really no better moment to become an ally. I hope you'll join us in validating, normalizing, and empowering millions of people to unapologetically express their identity, to feel valued and accepted if and when they do decide to come out, and so that they have no fear in openly expressing their love. Thank you.
Okay, that was great. Thank you all so much for inviting me to participate in this event. I really appreciate the vote of confidence in my ability to speak to these issues, and I'm really proud of you all for the courage that it takes to sometimes just to stand up and to be who you are. I'm here as an ally to the LGBTQ community, but also as a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, an educator, and so that kind of left me with a lot of questions about where to start, what sort of spiel to give. So I considered talking about sort of my political and ethical outlook, rooted in principles of solidarity. I considered talking about myself, basically, and like Janelle decided that wasn't the direction to go in. But I did think about talking about my responsibilities as an educator, as a member of a community, as a coworker, and all of those things I think would have come from my heart and felt meaningful, to me at least. But I didn't think it was necessarily the best angle, so I decided, since I'm a historian, to talk about something that's a little simpler, but I think maybe more fundamental, which is what's true and what's false, what's real and what's unreal, what is history and what is not. So a lot of times when I tell someone that I'm a historian, I get a stock question, something like, do you teach the real history or ... right? I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I think I know what those people usually mean. Do you teach history that's woke, right? Do you teach history that's shaped by your political agenda? Do you teach history, I think in other words, that deviates from the stories that they are most familiar and comfortable with, right? And when I'm asked this question, I try to answer as confidently as I can that yes, I do teach real history, the real history of real people, as much as our limited sources allow us to. I think that that's the responsibility of every historian. The real history of real human beings, or as the early 19th century Prussian historian Leopold von Ranke said, the way it actually was, wie es eigentlich gewesen, right? So this is, to me, fundamental to what historians do. In 1976, the French philosopher Michel Foucault published a book entitled The History of Sexuality. I won't summarize it now, although it's worth getting to know. Among other things, he makes the basic point that sexuality has a history. That is to say, it's not a timeless given. It's something that human beings and societies have interpreted and reinterpreted over time. Foucault himself is what we would probably call a gay man, although he didn't like the word. And it was because he associated it with an unfamiliar culture that he encountered for the first time visiting the United States. He preferred to call himself a homosexual. So right there, an illustration of history and renegotiation of the meanings of questions around sexuality in his own life. Gender also has a history, gender norms, accepted roles, whether pink stands for boy and blue stands for girl, a change that came about within the last 100 years in this society and culture, right? A trivial example, but I think an illustrative one. History is how we got where we are. It's the study of the mechanisms that get us from past to present to future. People acting on and gradually, or all at once, changing impersonal social structures that we all live within is the heart of what history is about. The categories we often take for granted have histories too, categories like man and woman, but lots of other gender categories that exist and have existed in many times and places. The Hydra of the Indian subcontinent, the Two-Spirit people of indigenous North America, for example, and there are many more. People have thought and argued about how to categorize themselves and others in many times and places. Some people have preferred and tried to enforce rigid definitions of acceptable gender expression or sexual behavior. Some, often at great risk to themselves, have declared that those definitions did not apply to them, did not correspond to their experience of the world. To ignore that dynamic is to ignore a huge part of the experience of being alive for untold millions of people over the 300,000 or so years that our species has been on this earth. It is to censor and deform the truth of human history. After all, history is about people. It is a discipline that asks who we human beings are, where we've been, and where we're going in all of our diversity and complexity. And diversity in the area of sexuality and gender identity and expression is and has been reality, the truth, in every time and place that we know of. In every place and time, there have been those who have tried to enforce rigid norms, those norms themselves always changing and evolving, and those who have not, quote unquote, fit those norms, some of whom fought to change those norms or sought to escape them altogether so that they could live their lives authentically, peacefully, freely. Because, as history and I think the humanistic social sciences and the humanities are particularly good at illustrating for us, people are simply more complex, more diverse, and more interesting than any simple categorization has ever been able to express, or probably ever will. And once we realize that, with the help of careful research and systematic thought, we realize that many things we take for granted also have histories, also have been made and remade by people over time, and that in all times and places there have been those who dissented from the generally accepted way of loving, dressing, thinking, living. And their stories reveal as much about the past and the present as stories that may be more familiar, but are no more true. That can be a scary thought. It can be more comforting to assume that the world as we know it is the only one that has ever existed or could exist. But it also opens up possibilities. It opens up the idea that the fundamentals of how we live not only do change, but are likely to continue changing. And it reminds us that we all have a choice of our small roles in shaping those changes. Will we work toward a future that will be more humane, more accepting, and more free? Or toward one in which people will continue to fear to be their real selves and to tell the truth? I congratulate you all. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event.
Let's get another round of applause for our speakers. Thank you all for doing this today. It's not always the easiest thing to come up and talk to an audience, myself included. But thank you all for coming out again today. That was lovely. I realized that as you all gave your experiences coming out, I forgot to share mine when I introduced myself. Bit ironic. Once again, I'm Isaiah Boyce. I go by he, him, and I am a bisexual. And so nothing particularly special about that, but it's one thing, coming out for equality probably should, come out a little bit. So we do have some refreshments in the back that we will get into to partake in. And then we typically end off by doing a little march to the Panther statue with some of our pride flags. So we're probably going to take like 10 to 15 minutes to just socialize, have some cookies, and then we're going to do our little march over, take some pictures, and then you'll be free to go. Not that you're a hostage to begin with, but so. Alrighty, let's enjoy some refreshments. There you go. Thank you all for coming out again today.